Welcome, everyone, to the Monday, February 12th meeting of the Planning and Development Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is approval of regular meeting minutes of January 22nd.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. All right, now we're moving on to item P1, Resolution 10R18, granting municipal use exemption for public utility at 2525 Church Street. And we have 4 people signed up for this. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. We don't have anyone signed up for P1. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Ms. Esther, you have signed up for P1. Yes. We have a new sign-up sheet.
You start confusing me these days. Good evening. I do have some questions, and I came in on the end of the AP and W meeting, and they was talking about this facility, and listened to Mr. Gerard's comments and everything. Now, is this going to, we knew about the bathroom, that they was going to have a bathroom there and everything. Now you're talking about showers and there for the kids to shower off from the water park 4 years down the line. So what are we getting over there? The community would like to know, because we're getting it in bits and pieces. And I'm reading this, and then I said, oh, Betty, you should have read that first, and maybe you would understand. It would have been helpful if it had been in all one package and all together. So what we was told, and what was at the DAPR meeting, and at the other meeting, and now before you, that is for action, a lot of things was left out for the community to know about. So it would be helpful if we could get a detailed, laid out plan as to what is going to be happening over there in that neighborhood. We know the water facility is there. They explained that that's safe. We don't have no problem with that. But now we have a whole lot of other stuff that is connected to the water park, but it's also connected to this building. Now, is there going to be them putting the showers in stuff, or fixing up all of that now, or is that all going to come later? And will there be someone to man those sites?
Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Esther, for the concerns about the park over there. So there will not be any showers. And that was never part of the proposal. I think Director Stoneback maybe mentioned what might be required based on the capacity of the splash park, which is 80, and shower is not required. So it will be bathrooms that will comply with the amount of the usage for the park. And the park is a goal. So at this time, we only have money funded or budgeted for the demolition, which we will reimburse the Water Commission for the demolition. And then we'll have to look at ways to fund the improvements of the splash park. And before we move forward, once funding is identified, we will have community meetings, as we did for the pumping station. We'll have staff reports at our ward meetings. We will welcome and encourage community input from the immediate neighbors and even the broader community. This is a community project, and we will not move forward until we have those very transparent and public discussions.
Okay, thank you. All right. This is for action tonight. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. P1 will be moving on to the council. Next is Ordinance P2, Ordinance 21018, Special Use Permit for a Special Educational Institution, public in the I2 General Industrial Zone District.
Move approval.
Any discussion?
That's an old light.
Yeah. No speakers on this? All right. Would you like to speak on this? Okay, please come forward.
Good evening. Darlene Cannon, I come as a representative of 1300 Pittner Block Club. We are opposed to the off-campus school, which will be placed in our neighborhood. Also, I understand that many feel that it's a good thing because it's going to save money, and that it will be neighborhood students, which means that it will be predominantly black students in a predominantly black neighborhood. Would this school be more appropriately placed in a white or mixed neighborhood? Are you concerned about the demographics and the possibility of deepening the lines of segregation in Evanston? As I've said numerous times before, the neighbors feel excluded and misled about this process by the city. This is one more example of how black neighborhoods are not afforded the same consideration and respect as white neighborhoods in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. It's been moved and seconded to move this on for introduction to the council. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right. So with that, it will be moving on to the council with and it will be taken off the agenda and voted on separately. All right, item P3 is ordinance 14018, granting a special use for a type 2 restaurant, Ruby's, at 1723 Simpson Street. This is for, we had held this at our prior meeting. This is for a type 2 restaurant in the B1 business district. Item is for introduction. Okay. Ms. Esther, would you like to speak to this item?
Not opposed to it, just have some concern in that the conversation when he came before you be in the planning committee and all of the other committee, and the conversation around this particular project. We have that has a history. It has a great history, it seemed like. It went from a restaurant to a restaurant and grocery store, now back to a restaurant. Then there was all of this discussion about removing the blocks, that the blocks should not be there and everything. And the one thing that was puzzling to me, I could not find a city ordinance that says block windows or block windows could not be in a commercial site. I did not find that anywhere in the city code. So how are we demanding something that you don't have a code for? Then it's just arbitrary and capricious. You just make a decision and you carry it out. That doesn't seem right. And then there was this long discussion about the bathroom. I did go in the facility, did look. There is 2 bathrooms in there, and one of them is a handicap bathroom that was put in when the restaurant was first put in. And from all intents and purposes, and look, it still meets all those requirements set by the state of Illinois and in accordance with the International Building Code of 2012. So what is wrong with that bathroom that a different ADA bathroom has to be put in when you're still going to use the same code? So that I need to have, and I think a lot of people is confused. If you got one code that says the bathroom has to be this, the bathroom was put in under that code, so why come that code in that bathroom do not carry forth as being a handicap accessible bathroom. And if he's having less than 50 people in there, you can have one bathroom. The codes say that. And it's like a unisex bathroom, but it's handicap and it's state male, female, other gender, and handicap. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any comment among the, on the committee? Pardon? That completes.
speaker?
That's the only speaker.
Okay. I think,
Alderman Wilson?
was there a motion for this?
No, it has not been moved for introduction.
Okay, so I'll move so we can talk about it.
All right. Are you making the motion?
I'm making a motion for introduction,
Okay, for the purposes of discussion.
for the purposes of discussion.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I think. I didn't, my understanding was we were going to get a lease. I don't,
Yes, it has been received.
oh, okay. Is it here? Where is it? I don't have it. Was it emailed or how did we get it?
Yes, Madam Chair and Alderman, we did receive a lease, a 5-year lease agreement after the packet was sent out, so we received that Friday afternoon.
Okay. Was that in the updated packet? Or?
It's not, I do have hard copies available.
Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry, if you just pass those down.
Well, if there's no other lights at this time, I will go forward and say what my opinion is. Special uses are privileges that the city council grants so that someone can operate a type 2 restaurant in this instance, or build or operate a type of use that we don't consider normal or permitted in a particular district. And we have fairly high standards for a special use. It's a privilege that someone earns. It's not a right. And I have to say that given Mr. Creighton's current pending legal proceedings, I do not believe that he has earned the right to have a special use to operate a type 2 restaurant on Simpson Street. So I cannot support a special use for this application. All right, if we don't have any other lights, I'm going to call the question. All right, all those in favor of introducing, for granting the introduction of this special use, please say aye. All those opposed? No.
No.
All right. The motion fails introduction, and it will not be moved on to the city council. All right, moving on to our next item, which is our discussion of the lakefront policy for private land. We have a number of people signed up to speak on this issue, and why don't I call them at this point. So first is Mike Vasilko. Mr. Vasilko, did you want to speak on this?
Thank you. Mike Vasilko, 2728 Reese Avenue. I'm interested in hearing the discussion that takes place because I'm confused a little bit now as to what the city's motive is in beginning this discussion. Originally, it was a floodplain ordinance issue related to residents who have property along a lake that want to do some improvements to protect their property. And there was a question about the property line in particular. But the way this memo that was issued with the packet states it's now lakefront policy for private land. So that's much different in my mind than floodplain ordinance for residential property. So primarily I'm interested in how it's segued from one to the other. It's also a little misleading the livability benefits in the memo says protect and preserve natural characteristics of Lake Michigan lakeshore. The reality is there is no natural lakeshore left, with the exception of, in Illinois at least, with the exception of a small piece in Highland Park. So that's a little overstated, I thought. And also, on the second page of the memorandum, where it says prohibit conversion of public water of Lake Michigan to private lakeshore property via fill, that really is counter to what a lot of the residents who I heard speak at the last meeting say, that some of them own property in the lake because the water level goes back and up and down, back and forth. So it really should, that sentence should really go on to say, unless the water in question is in fact private, because again, some of the residents and other property owners do in fact own lake bottom property according to the Cook County property record. So you should just be careful about how that language is proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Bill McGrath.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'd like to applaud the city for really taking a serious look at this issue. And it's not a simple issue, and I wasn't really sure. I was kind of signed up to talk in case I wanted to say something in rebuttal, but I do want to comment on the previous speaker's comments. No one, to my knowledge, I own a riparian lot on Edgemere Court, 943 Edgemere. It is my understanding, I know that I have sand in my backyard, and that sand moves from time to time, almost daily, perhaps even hourly, and it moves as the water goes up and down, and it moves as sand shifts up and down the lakefront. And it shifts quite a bit, depending upon winds and depending upon other factors affecting the drift. So that lake line is moving constantly, and I can tell you, I do not own any seabed under the water. My lot line is defined, as is everyone's, as a riparian line is the water line wherever it may be from time to time. And therefore, I have urged the city to consider using a line and to treat this just like any zoning issue and to draw a line. And the state or whoever drew the floodplain has already drawn a line for us. They've established a floodplain, and I looked at that line, and it looks to me like it was, it's a intelligently placed line. And I think the city should treat that line as basically the line from which they will regulate, just as they would regulate any zoning situation. Setbacks, what you build, how much coverage. I mean, we have zoning that deals very specifically with what people can put on their property. And a revetment or a wall or something like that is simply no different. And I believe that would be the approach, and I think that is the approach that is being suggested, and I think it's a very good approach, so I applaud that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Harry Lawrence.
I'm going to pass it this time.
Okay, thanks, Harry. David Price? Wait. Okay, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I, like the first person, wasn't expecting to speak, but there's some things that have come up in terms of confirming why I'm confused. And so with regard to the floodplain ordinance, that is impactful to me, even though I'm not riparian. And I've observed people near me who have been wonderful and actually have riparian lots, who have done everything and more to comply and make a contribution in terms of her property and those around her. She's to be commended. Kathy Grant, if I can enter that. She's a person of great honor and respect. In terms of another neighbor who will remain nameless, in terms of floodplain ordinance, the so-called city zoning has allowed certain things to occur with regard to my property that affects my ability or anyone else's ability to enter my property when that wasn't a concern before. And because it wasn't concerned, it's because we had a shared property between the two houses that she used to build her kingdom in terms of this huge fence that seems to want to take over part of my property as well, even though it's all legal. So the question the other fellow brought up in terms of we have zoning ordinances, we have something called judgment. And I think when you open discussions like you have been in terms of city council, I've seen the city council grow in terms of being more open. The transparency part makes these discussions much better. And I think maybe the zoning board should consider that they should open themselves up and be transparent with regard to how people can be affected that they could never anticipate because they haven't lived in the house or they haven't seen the actual plans, to the extent that my house ended up having a retainer wall that was near the property line. You don't build houses like that under zoning ordinances unless you have approval to do it that way. She's proceeded to now block that entrance, going right very close, within 30 inches of my divider, so I can't get through into my property. Now, I would think common sense would say that's not very neighborly, and we need to have a discussion about being more neighborly rather than some so-called law for law's sake. So people who have riparian lots, beautiful riparian lots, I really, really enjoy being near enough to share some of that and what you do to your property. So as a neighbor, I am appreciative of all the people who share their beauty with the rest of us. There are people who want to wall things off, and that's a completely different feeling. And when you feel that, that kind of sends up that maybe there's something not right about this, and maybe zoning in the community needs to address those aspects. So when you feel like it's friendly and inviting and someone's living with nature, that's one thing. But when they want to wall it off, like Wilmette has its northern section by Gilson Park, that it looks like a battle zone where people have walled off areas with giant walls and whatever they can. It was awful. I was crying. My dog was dying of cancer, and we took that walk as a memory. And my heart was crying because it was all this imposing stuff that this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. So if something says, this is mine, and this is really something to share, like the generous people who realize that, and like my neighbor, then we don't have problems. So my ask is that the floodplain be considered to include the rest of us neighbors, and that even though you're talking about riparian, please have the discussions general enough, as this is indicating, to include the people who are affected when people adversely impact them with things that don't grant them access to the property or a right to view, in the sense of beautiful sharing of view, not necessarily you have to peek around their shoulders, but just, something beautiful and consistent with the land and the property that everyone loves and wants to share. So Evanston should be a sharing community, and I share my property in terms of anybody wants to come over, and hopefully I can get it fixed up where I can have more people to help enjoy what I feel is a treasure. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Is there any discussion on the part of the committee? This is a report from the staff to us. Alderman Wilson, would you, yes, Mr. Gertis, would you like to provide us with your report?
Sorry.
Oh, the light. Other way.
Chair Alderman Gary Gertis, manager of the Building and Inspection Services Division. So what we have for you tonight, item for discussion is on lakefront policy and potential code amendments to the city's floodplain ordinance. So just a little background, we initially discussed this at the Planning and Development Committee back in November. We held a public meeting with lakefront property owners in January, and we're back again tonight as a discussion item. So you've seen this before, so I will try to be brief. We have 42 residential lakefront properties within the city. These properties are located within FEMA-designated floodplain. Recent high lake levels, heavy wave action have degraded some of these properties, and it has resulted in an increase in shoreline protection projects. The east property line is subject to some of these protection projects. Some of the projects that we have seen have resulted in earthwork or revetment that has gone beyond the east property line. I do have a detail of what a revetment is a little bit later, so we'll show that a little bit clearer. So the permit process for the shoreline protection projects, it's a joint application to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. Through our floodplain ordinance, the city also requires local review and permit. One of the problems that we're seeing is that the city is getting notification of these projects after the review and the approval by the joint agencies. The city is looking, if we have a comment, if we have a concern on a project, we want to be those comments and concerns to be vetted during the design stage and not after the approval by the joint agencies. The homeowner, the resident, has a significant time and expense into the project, and it's not the time for the city to ask for some type of redesign. So as I stated before, this is a detail on a revetment. As you can see over on the left, you have a proposed seawall. Typically, this is your eastern property line. On most of our properties, some type of seawall, some type of sheet piling would be your east property line. As you can see in this detail, there's a 6-foot projection of the revetment into the lake at the top, and at the bottom, you're 18 feet into the lake. So this is one of the city's concerns, is that we're seeing these protections project into the lake further and further. Some of what our recommendations would be is to add some language to strengthen our floodplain ordinance, which would require concurrent review of projects with the joint agencies. City staff has also already reached out to some of these agencies to ask for that concurrent review. We've also contacted some of the designers that we're seeing submit projects and letting them, notifying them that we want to see concurrent review. So again, that we're not seeing these projects after that joint agency approval. We want to see a notice requirement at the time of application to adjacent property owners that the protection may impact adjacent property owners here. So here we're saying 10 properties upwater, 10 properties downwater, unless intervened by the city or Northwestern University. I think that for the most part, that would encompass any protection project within a certain range. I think the city properties pretty much intervene most of those properties. So typically we have a group of 10 or a group of 7 properties, and then we have some type of intervention. We would prohibit conversion of public waters of Lake Michigan to private lakeshore property via fill. I think a couple points on this is that we are not stating here that a protection cannot go beyond the east property line. What we are stating is that the protection does not create private property. We understand that each property is unique. It has to be reviewed not only for the protection being proposed, but also we have to look at adjacent properties also, what type of protections that they have. So we would like to limit any type of encroachment into Lake Michigan, but we're not stating here that that protection cannot go east of the historic east property line. And then we would require a plat of survey after construction to detail the as-built conditions and verify that property line is consistent with what was proposed. So we do not see that property line has shifted. So we would look to incorporate any feedback from the committee and then return to you in March as an introduction item.
Thank you.
Questions?
Alderman Wilson?
Could you just go back to the slide on the design of the, or to the, yeah. Now, I think, we've got a big revetment in Evanston, just the rocks are our, shoreline. But that's allowed in a lot of places, the sand to build up. When you have this on a private property or just a limited space, what can happen or what typically happens, or is there a typical result? It could kind of be anything, right? As far as sand building up.
Yeah, and
Impacting the neighbors.
Probably some of the property owners can speak to that better than I can, to be honest. I think our concern here is just that creeping of that property line. We don't want to see that private property is created. So I think that for the most part, most of these, when we've talked to designers prior to coming to the committee, and they are looking at, they're not looking at just that project. Like I said, they're looking at everything that's surrounding that project and what impact a project like this would have to a adjacent property owner.
Right. So in other words, if one person has one, the impact could be more dramatic on the adjacent properties.
Possibly.
Possibly,
yeah.
right. I mean, it's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
It's a possibility.
Well, and Mr. Gertis, we have a number of people who have revetments that have been there for decades. And I think another one of the issues is that sometimes because of the lake levels going up and down so much, they need repair. So I think that's another issue that we want to make sure is clear. But we don't want someone to decide that they're going to build a seawall or a revetment out further and have the city find out about it after it's already been through the review of all of these other agencies, when we really need to know about it at the same time that everyone that they're applying for this, and that their neighbors should know about it as well.
Correct.
Because really, no part of the shoreline is disconnected from any other part of the shoreline. It's all really interconnected. So if you do something one place, it will likely have an impact somewhere along the shoreline, if not immediately next door, then somewhere down the line.
Yeah, we're not looking to prevent measure a property owner to prevent them from restoring or protecting their shoreline property. That's not the intent here.
Right.
Again, I think one of the biggest items of concern is that that joint review was occurring before the city was even notified. If we do have a concern, we want it to be vetted at that design stage. We don't want it to be vetted and ask for a redesign later on. So.
Yeah. So this is really to everyone's benefit, to the community's benefit, to someone who wants to make a repair so that they are not surprised by the city being surprised later on.
Right.
This really should be how it is, how it operates all along, that these agencies should let us know. So this way we are really putting it into our ordinance that we are there at the table from the very beginning.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else from anyone else on the committee? Yes, Alderman Ravel?
Well, it's not only that we lakefront property owners need to be able to repair their seawalls or their revetment, but speaking as someone in the northern part of the city, most of us have seawalls that only very recently needed to have a revetment. So some of us are putting in a revetment for the first time. So I think we need to be really clear. I agree 100% that we don't want private property owners to suddenly be having their plat of survey look as though they're gobbling up land that was previously part of the lake. But I think we need to also make it clear that property owners can do reasonable things to protect their property line or their property. And so I guess the tricky part in this is how do we in our ordinance define the eastern boundary of properties? I mean, for those of us who have a definite seawall, that it's very clear, but for other properties where there's more of a beach and the the water comes and goes, how do we define that east property line?
Well, I think for our review purposes, we did look into it, and I think that 35 of the 42 properties have some sort of seawall or sheet piling, and then, it's a combination of many different things, but 35 of the 42 have something there. So for our review purposes, and I think for IDNR's review purposes, they typically, state that seawall is the eastern property line. For properties, that do not have that, we would have to be looking to plats of survey. So whatever the historical records that we have, we would look to that to establish what that property line would be. So, on most of these, we do have historical records on most of these properties. We'd be looking at those for, even if they have a seawall or not, we're going to be looking for those plats of survey to establish what that, historical east property line is.
So do you have a sense of that we think that you're doing the right thing and you should just bring back to us an ordinance embodying what you've already done?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is actually...
Mr. McGrath had one additional question, but go ahead, Mr. Gertis, did you want to finish?
I was just going to say, I think a lot, we're just strengthening the ordinance. The review, the permitting is already a requirement that the city has. We are not looking to codify or define what public and private is here. I think that's an issue for courts to decide. We are looking for, have a basis for review, make sure that those notifications are there, make sure that we are, getting that plat of survey after construction so we see that the property line has remained. So those are the things that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Mr. McGrath, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, just make a couple comments on this presentation. And I have one of the properties, so everyone understands, that does have beachfront. And we've lived in the house for 25 years, and my neighbors have lived there for another 25 or 50 years. And I'm telling you, that beachfront is constant. It moves daily, it moves hourly, but at a macro level, it is constant. And I know the consultants and the people selling these revetment projects, come up with statements and talking about the lakefront being sand-starved and being, prone to erosion. And yes, existing shore protections do need to be periodically updated. You need to paint your house every 5 or 10 years. I mean, you have to redo your driveway every once in a while. Yes, you have to do maintenance, but maintenance is quite different than taking 18 feet of seabed. And in particular, in this particular project, the person has the ability to pull that top back 18 feet into their yard. I mean, you can do stuff with your own land. You don't have to maintain your tabletop land and then slant something 18 feet out into the public waters. Just simply, if you want that 18 feet of slant, bring your property back 18 feet. Use your own land for that revetment. You don't need public land. So I'm very concerned about this concept of that we have to protect people's private property. We don't really know where people's private property is. That line is constantly moving. Hourly it moves. And I think I've told you at the last meeting, I have surveys of my property that was done 5 years ago where I have an extra 100 feet of property. It's like it's when you do the survey, the land, the water line moves. So I'm urging the city to define the shoreline and to define the shoreline that it will regulate and not let people move out beyond the shoreline as the city defines it. And obviously the definition is already in the floodplain ordinance. There is a definition. You can look at the maps and there's a very distinct shoreline that's defined in the floodplain ordinance. I suggest you use that or review it. Use something else if you want to, but define the shoreline as opposed to this concept of the riparian owner's property, because it's moving constantly. It's not something you can define. And you can't just rely on somebody putting in their shoreline protection the day the water is low and going out further. You have to understand that the shoreline that you're protecting is a shoreline. It's not the riparian owner's line. There was one other point I wanted to make here. Well, I guess those are the issues, and I feel strongly that you should not be swayed by consultants saying that everybody needs to build 18 feet out into the lake to protect their own land. Take it back. Use your own land, not the public waters, to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, Alderman Ravel?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that even though Evanston's shoreline is relatively limited, it's very different at the north end of Evanston than it is at the south end of Evanston. And so I think the challenge is to write language that accommodates both the situation at the north end of Evanston, where really we truly are our property line doesn't move and go up and down because we have a seawall and we're above the lake, and it's very different from a part of Evanston in the south where they have more of a beach and a sandy area. So I think we want to try to craft language that says, perhaps something about the more restrictive of either the existing seawall or the rear lot line is defined by historic surveys or something. So we acknowledge that we have different kinds of conditions in different parts of the city.
I think that's helpful. Yeah. Okay. Oh. All right. I don't see any more lights. All right. Staff, Mr. Curtis, you have our direction.
Okay.
And we will hear back from you in March.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. With that, our discussion item is concluded, and we are at adjournment.
Second.
All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all.